Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. For the next half an hour or so, myself, Rhiann Thomas, and my colleague Hannah are going to take you through some of our findings from our new hypothesis work, looking at how health and wellness could evolve in the coming months and years. So I'm Rhiann. I head up the shopper and food to go team at IGD. And as you can imagine, that has kept us very busy, keeping an eye on the shoppers and their habits in the last few months and predicting what could happen next. And today I'm joined by my colleague Hannah. Hannah, if I could ask you to introduce yourself.
Hi, so I'm Hannah Skeggs, Nutrition and Scientific Affairs Manager here at IGD, and health and nutrition has also been something that's been very interesting during the time of this pandemic. So I'll share our more societal hypotheses a bit later.
Thank you, Hannah. So yes, we've joined forces today and we are going to share with you some highlights from a pan IGD project around where we think health and wellness could go next. So as Hannah alluded to, we've been playing a game of two halves today. I'm going to talk you through a little bit around how we've developed these hypotheses. Then I'm going to take you through how we think the first three hypotheses that really kind of impact those individual and household levels, what those are, and how we think they could evolve in the short, medium, and long term. And then I'm going to hand over to Hannah, who's going to talk about the broader societal health hypotheses that we've put together for today. So in terms of how we approach this, something IGD spends quite a lot of time as an organisation really looking towards the future and thinking how things could evolve in normal circumstances. And obviously in this pandemic, we have done a lot of work as a research team and as a total business looking at the changes that are happening and how we think that could evolve. So the stages that we went through to kind of put together these foundations really kind of fall into these three flows here. So we started by reviewing all our existing research, and as you'll be aware, IGD is a research organisation, so we have a long history of research in terms of tracking what shoppers have been up to, but also looking around the world in terms of what's happening in the retail and food and grocery space. So we've been seeing what we could learn from previous circumstances, previous events as to what could happen next. We've also been listening to our members and to our customers to understand the kind of questions that they're grappling with at the moment and some of their thinking around some of the trends they're already seeing and the ones that they believe may have more longevity. And from there, we formulated our hypotheses where we had a number, which we then whittled down to the 6 today. And you'll see that some are more focused and some are broader in their scope. And hopefully that will become apparent as to why that is shortly. We've also shared these, stress tested them with a few different groups of customers. And today, obviously, we'll be sharing them with yourselves. And there is an opportunity to submit questions throughout the webinar. So we would appreciate that and we'll answer as many of those as we can. But we'll also leave you with our contact details. So should anything come to you in the coming days and weeks, please do get in touch with us. So before we start, we're going to launch a little poll just to check that it's working and to see what everyone thinks. Lots of conversations, I'm sure, at work and with your family and friends around the changes that you've made during lockdown. We're going to start with a quick little poll to get a sense of how you think your lockdown habits have impacted your health. So do you think that your overall health, have improved, that you're healthier, less healthy, or there's been no real change during this lockdown period? Okay, I think we're coming in. So can we see those results? Great, well, that's really interesting. So over half of you believe that you're actually healthier in lockdown. And that's really fascinating. And we're seeing some really interesting shifts in some of our shopper data as well at IGD in terms of people's attitudes towards food and their general health. So yeah, something we'll be keeping a close eye on, I'm sure all of us, in the coming months. So to crack on with the hypotheses for today then. So as we mentioned, we have these 6 hypotheses which are summarised here for you. So we've done a number of pieces of work at IGD looking at how the pandemic could impact grocery retail. And if you want any more information on that, please do get in touch with us. But here we've specifically looked at what these could mean and what these changes could mean for health and wellness. Important to recognise that this is focused predominantly on the UK, but we do believe that there are some interesting read across in other markets, in other countries, and other members of the IGD team at the moment are working with the hypotheses to see what they could mean in other markets. So keep an eye out for that as that comes to the forefront. So I'm going to start now by sharing the first three of our hypotheses. And the first of those is, we're calling it the interest in holistic health will increase. And I think this probably won't be a really big surprise to many of us. And actually, it's probably not necessarily a new phenomenon. So last year in the IGD shopper team, we did a big piece of research looking at how shoppers define, understand, and approach their own personal health. And we saw a number of examples of our shoppers and our respondents at that time talking about health in a much more holistic way. So talking about food and diet, absolutely, and nutrition, but also talking about exercise and obviously their mental health as well. And during this pandemic, we've seen a number of indicators that make us feel that even more so that this hypothesis is one to keep a really close eye on and one that we think will evolve. We've seen the use of mental health apps increasing significantly. We've seen 63% of adults telling us that it's actually more important to be active now than before the crisis. And it's interesting to see that over half of you told us just now that you believe you're actually healthier now than you were prior to the event. We've also seen a huge increase in the sale of multivitamins and products with immunity claims. And we think that going forward, people will really prioritise their health and self-care more and will think about the way in which they live in a broader sense. So just to give you a little bit more. So this slide here is just referring to the research I referenced just then. But this is actually a 2019 slide. Last year, the team spent a lot of time talking to different respondents, talking to different shoppers, and asking them to define what being healthy meant to them. So they were talking around things like weight, etc. They're talking about energy, but we had lots of conversations with our respondents around emotional well-being. So we saw a lot of awareness of these issues, even before the coronavirus crisis. And I think even going back to the year before that, our Shoppers of the Future research at IGD identified the different motivations for living healthier lives. And it wasn't necessarily just about wanting to look good, it was also about wanting to feel good. So I think we definitely have seen this as a trend that's been emerging for a little while. And that is played through again in the next slide, which just shares with you some of the examples of things that are already happening in the marketplace. So on the left-hand side of the slide here, you can see an example of a book. It's an anti-anxiety diet that talks to people around just that, how they can, certain foods and certain types of foods can improve their mental well-being as well as their physical health. In the middle, we see an example of a product that is from the States. It's an ice cream that is essentially designed to help with sleep. So we talk about the importance of sleep as a part of a healthy lifestyle. And the example on the right-hand side is an event that took place in London last year called Balance Festival. So this festival wasn't just around music, it was around total health and wellness. And there were events and activities taking place there, from yoga classes to different food products happening, people really talking about health in a very different and more holistic way. So when we turn our attention to our hypotheses, and you'll see this format followed throughout our slides today, we really talked as a group around what we thought this could mean in the short and in the long term. And short term, in the purpose of these hypotheses, is very much that. We're talking kind of the next 6 months or so. And longer term, we are thinking 2 to 3 years. What is important to say with all of our hypotheses is we are going to be keeping a close eye on how each and every single one of these evolve. And we're using some of our data to support the tracking of those, because we're well aware that this environment is something none of us have seen before, and things may change as we go through. But in terms of what this holistic health hypothesis could mean in the short term, we believe that many will increasingly experiment with healthy eating at home. And we've seen, as we all are now, using online for lots of different things, we've seen that online really offers a space for inspiration and gives shoppers and consumers a chance to explore things in more detail than perhaps they ever had before when it comes to food and groceries. We think individuals will place increased emphasis on staying fit and active. And in some work we've been doing in the shopper team at IGD, it's been really interesting how people have talked about their daily exercise as a bit of a treat, particularly at the earlier parts of lockdown, when that was their only opportunity to really get out of the house. However, the other flip side of that is for some of our respondents who are very physically active normally and would be playing sports or in the gym regularly, they've talked more about being quite aware of their diet, because they've had to achieve that balance in a way they haven't had to before. So potentially they've been able to they've been more lax with what they've been eating because they've been so physically active, in their words. They now felt that they actually had to be more aware. And the other incredibly important part we're seeing around health in the short term is a real focus on hygiene. So be that personal hygiene and home hygiene, and what that means for the products they're buying and the impact they believe that has on their health. When we switch to the longer term, so in the next 2 to 3 years, we believe that actually self-care will become a really important part of the everyday routine, and that thinking about health and wellness will be something that we'll all do a lot more. I think this general sense of not taking things for granted anymore is definitely going to come through in this as well. With many more potentially people choosing to work from home, we do think that actually the emphasis on work-life balance could really be incredibly important in the future, and people thinking about how they look after themselves in different circumstances. And I guess the opportunity is really clear from a product perspective around that there's a real opportunity for different types of products to support this total health and wellness agenda. So it might not necessarily be just simply about food and drink products now, but real associations and opportunities for non-food, and probably most predominantly health and beauty products, and how that can support an overall health and wellness agenda. And I think last but not least as well is the role of personalisation. Again, from our research with our shoppers, what's been very clear to us is that actually one size doesn't necessarily fit all. People will look for things that suit them and suit their families as well and their own health. And technology has an incredibly important role to enable this and to facilitate this for different types of people. So that's our first hypothesis, and I think it's fair to say that that one is probably the most broad-reaching, or broad in its scope rather. So that one is very big, if you like. So we started with the biggest. And we moved to the second one, which is all around affordability. So we believe that affordability will prove to be challenging to some health priorities. So we know that IGD, and I'm going to share some data with you shortly, that for a lot of shoppers and consumers, one of the barriers to eating healthily or living more healthier lifestyles is a perceived perception that to do so is to spend more money, and can be potentially off-putting and limiting for some people. And as we are all aware, a lot of us potentially will be struggling financially in the coming months and years, and therefore people will have to make trade-offs. And potentially that could mean that affordability is prioritised over and above nutrition. But that does actually, present opportunities for the industry to support our shoppers through delivery of really great value. What we've seen throughout this period is the food industry leading and really supporting vulnerable individuals and those experiencing food poverty. So if the economic situation worsens, there could well be increased pressure on food banks and for retailers to continue to play a broader role in supporting that community. And I think the potential impact is incredibly clear when you look at this next slide. So this is a slide, one of the slides that our chief economist just shared with a number of different audiences now, and this is from the Office of Budgetary Responsibility and the Bank of England. And this is their projections around the GDP growth over the coming months. And as you can see, it makes for quite glum reading. They are predicting a real downturn in economic output, and if this is in fact correct, it could well be the worst economic downturn in centuries, making that the previous credit crunches look pretty tame by comparison. So I think while we can learn a lot from previous things and previous events as to how shoppers and how consumers have reacted, I think it's fair to say that none of us have been through this before, so we will be learning as we go a lot with how shoppers have to and do adapt to the wider environment. And as I mentioned, this is something that we keep a really close eye on at IGD. We track a number of measures when it comes to health and barriers to potential to health at IGD. And this one here looks at perceptions around how expensive it is to eat healthily. And you can see the green line at the top of the chart. That is not a new trend. This is not something that is correlated with the recent events by any means. Shoppers have consistently been telling us that one of the principal barriers to eating more healthily is the challenge around perceiving it to be more expensive. And in just April this year, the last part of this chart here, it continues to be so. So well over 3/4 of shoppers believe that to be the case. So we know that that's an underlying concern for shoppers, and it's not a new factor. So again, if we look at this short and long-term approach here, in the short term, we think there's a real opportunity for the industry to drive health through value proposition. And we've seen obviously the role of promotions dramatically changing during this period. But we know that in previous economic challenges, shoppers have used promotions as a way to help them achieve their value goals. So it'll be interesting to see what opportunity different promotions or deliveries offer for shoppers in terms of helping support their overall health. We believe that the role of influencers such as Joe Wicks and Jamie Oliver will be important, particularly in the short term, to demonstrate to people how they can cook healthily on budgets and to optimize ingredients, and of course, stay active at this time as well. We think that we may also see, but particularly within certain groups of the population who are more impacted with regards to their finances, we think there will be more significant changes to their diets in relation to financial difficulties. For example, if they are resorting to having to use food banks or other assistances, that could have quite a material impact on their diets of themselves and their broader households. And as we look out, and I think James would say that we don't, this situation could unfold in the coming months and years. We have to be realistic that if the economic situation worsens, there could be further pressure on food banks, and that could come through to retailers more and continue to play a role in supporting the community in its broader sense. And we think that what will be really interesting is what shoppers look to retailers for going forward. Will they believe that actually retailers have a greater responsibility to help them to eat healthily due to the wider difficulties they're experiencing in their circumstances? The third of our hypotheses, and this again is something we're keeping a very close eye on in our new shopper research, IGD, is we believe that people will in fact have a greater connection with food. So despite the financial challenges and despite the societal issues that we're all dealing with at the moment, there has been a fundamental shift, as we're all experiencing, in the way that we plan, purchase and prepare our food. This enforced disruption has really changed how people shop. So just last year at IGD, we did a piece of research which found that people were on average doing 24 different shopping, food and grocery trips a month. Now, I think it's fair to say that that is definitely not happening right now. We are seeing an increase in people doing main shops. Obviously, that's differing by different channels, but we're definitely seeing that come through. We're seeing people bake and cook more at home with their families, and we're seeing a lot more people making the most of meal times as nothing else but a way to punctuate days, particularly at the start of the lockdown period. We've seen a lot of people talk about, with food becoming such a focus, we've seen the emotional connection between food really come to the forefront. And lots of people talking about wanting to understand better where their products come from and really place greater emphasis on the value of the food that we eat. And to that point, we've seen some more conversations around provenance and traceability, and people thinking about other ways they can support their overall health by understanding and buying the best food they possibly can within their circumstances. One of the hypotheses we have at IGD around the general retail landscape is we believe there could be a reversal of globalization. And this could mean that there is a demand for more local and seasonal produce. And then this, of course, will impact what we eat and when we eat it. So looking to the short and long term here, we've already seen in the short term a real diversification in where people and how people are shopping. There's obviously been lots of conversation around the increase in online shopping. And what we've seen at IGD in our data is absolutely that's the case. But what we've particularly seen is different types of shoppers shopping in different places. So online, not surprisingly, have seen an increase in older shoppers. And amongst younger shoppers, we've seen an increase in them using local providers such as farm shops or milkmen, etc. And we think that this support is definitely going to continue in the short term. We see a lot of people indicating an intention to continue to support their local food and grocery businesses. We think that actually people will continue in the short term to really place more value on food, thinking about their meals and enjoying that meal time as an opportunity to come together in really challenging circumstances. So making the most of that, sitting down together with your household. And that sitting at the table will, we think, be something that will stay with us, at least in the short term. And as we've all been experiencing, the out of home and impulsive channels have been significantly impacted, and we think will continue to be so, given that we are hoping that some of these, looking at with my Food to Go hat on, are hoping that more and more of these will continue to open in the coming weeks and months. However, we are really cognizant that a number of shoppers and consumers are probably going to be quite nervous about going back to some of these environments. So in the short term, we think that there will be some, it won't go back to pre-pandemic levels. And then when we look to the longer term, the next 2 to 3 years, we think that brands will increasingly place more emphasis on emotion over promotion, creating those connections with people around food and the products that they eat and consume, and a real opportunity to create some different kinds of campaigns potentially around some of these products. We think there'll be a greater interest in scratch cooking, ingredient sourcing and provenance. So people really wanting to know where their food is coming from. But also I think people have potentially dispelled some of their misunderstandings or myths around some of these things, realizing that to cook or to bake isn't necessarily as difficult as some of them may have thought originally. We think there'll be greater support for small and local businesses. We've seen a lot of local businesses and small local businesses really innovate and pivot their offer during this time to offer either delivery solutions or in-home solutions. So, bringing out of home in home essentially. And last but not least, we also think that the one thing we're keeping a close eye on is multi-generational shopping missions. As people have moved home with families from universities or come together at these times to do shopping on behalf of other people, we think that there could be more of a focus on sharing family recipes, heritage, and that tradition. And we think that we will see both some positive and potentially some negative results from that. But that's one that we are keeping an eye on there. And just these couple of quotes here is just to share with you something. So one new project we've launched during this period in the shopper team is something we call Shoppers of Our Time. So this is a cohort of 30 households from across Great Britain, and we're asking them essentially how they're dealing with life at the moment, and we are going to be tracking them for the next 2 years. And we did an initial study with them just towards the end of May, and there were lots of conversations with those respondents around how their approach to shopping and cooking has changed. And just a couple of examples here of how that's manifesting itself, from where they're shopping to how they're shopping to what they're cooking. And one of our respondents there sharing with us his triumph of making chocolate brownies there. So before I hand over to Hannah to share with you the next 3 hypotheses, we're going to carry out a little poll again here. So I've just given you a whistle-stop tour of the 3 hypotheses looking at that individual and household level. So I'd like to ask you, of those 3, which do you think will have the biggest impact on your business? Do you think it will be the increasing interest in holistic health? Do you think it's the affordability challenges? Or do you think it's that part around having greater connection with food? Which of those 3 do you think will have the biggest impact? That's really interesting. That's really interesting that it's well over half of you, 57%, state that you believe it's in fact for affordability challenges. I think it's something we know that it's really challenging for shoppers to prioritise a lot other things when there are financial challenges, and it's something we're going to be keeping a really close eye on at IGD. So please do keep an eye out on our content over the coming months. At this point, I am going to pass over to Hannah, who's going to talk you through the other 3 hypotheses.
Thanks so much for that, Rianne. So as Rianne said, I'm going to take you through our 3 broader, more societal hypotheses. So some of these are a bit niche, but actually where we're going is that these are the things that people have less personal impact on, and they're more impacted by general societal response. So this first hypothesis, employers will place wellness at the heart, really focuses on the importance of employee health and wellness. And it stems from the fact that importance of those working in the food industry is now widely recognised. We are key workers, we're celebrated as food heroes, and we can see from our shopper confidence stats that actually trust in the industry is at an all-time high. Over the last few months, we've had lots of stakeholder conversations with people in job roles across the industry, and they've confirmed that employee health is and will continue to be an increasing priority. Some of you have been offered mindfulness sessions, virtual gym classes, or even gift vouchers to spend on things that make you happy and well. But of course, there are also business continuity reasons for supporting health, and it's become harder to onboard new members of staff, so nurturing a good, strong team is really, really key for business survival. In the short term, employers are having to focus on providing a safe working environment. So that's either from home or by using social distancing, PPE, and a number of other measures. And areas like workplace catering have had to adapt massively to meet social distancing guidance, completely changing their food environment and the food offer. To support employees in this time of change and disruption, many businesses are reviewing and communicating their broader benefits package. So, an example of this is that 1 in 4 employers have increased spend on employee assistance programs as a result of COVID-19. So, these programs often offer counselling services, financial, and legal advice. So, a Reward and Employee Benefits Association survey found that many companies were looking to either improve the quality of service offered or to extend their EAPs to more of their workforce. 1 in 8 employers, so 13%, increased spending on their existing virtual GP services, and a further 8% have introduced those virtual GPs for the first time. And this is all part of a really big shift that we're seeing, which is that benefits are no longer just for head office staff. Businesses have really acknowledged in the last weeks that their manufacturing staff, their hauliers, their retail workers are really truly key for survival in this climate and in going forward. And many of us, especially office staff, have had to really embrace digital solutions and remote ways of working. On the whole, we see that employees have adjusted to this new work-life balance during lockdown. So it will hugely impact on how employers deliver health and wellness for all equally, with digital playing a huge part, whether that be digital meetings, schooling, or exercise classes. And I'm sure many of you will have seen announcements from the really big tech companies. So Twitter, Facebook, and Google have embraced this remote agile way of working, so much that they've committed to do it either until the end of 2020 or even to indefinitely. And considering benefits like reduced commute times, lower pollution levels, reduced operational cost, and increased morale, actually a permanent work from home business model could sound to a lot of people like an ultimate win. But it will, of course, be very interesting to see how health and wellness at work evolves in the longer term, especially as budgets are very constrained. Will we see offices start offering childcare? Will canteens reopen? And will we continue to value all of our employees equally, as we are in the short term? We do think that employees will really start valuing the entire work package more than before, though, considering things like flexible working, health insurance, and culture in addition to salary. So we are seeing this peak in the short term, but we do think a lot of these programs will be implemented to support long-term health and well-being and to really value the workforce that we have today. That's going to face increasing pressure to support people equally and to offer a great all-round package. So I'll move on to our second hypothesis, which is that obesity will remain a key focus. So it's very easy to forget what driving forces were out there before coronavirus, but most of the big political programs are likely here to stay. Many of you will have seen that Boris has placed a new focus on tackling obesity, so it's unlikely that the government's ambition to halve obesity by 2030 will change. But this work is still critical. Public Health England publishes a slide set annually, which examines the trends in underweight, overweight, and obesity prevalence among children using data from the National Child Measurement Programme. And this is the latest iteration of that slide. The reason it's relevant is that our obesity programmes all stem around reducing childhood obesity, because obese children are more likely to develop into obese adults and they will then experience the associated health risks. So trend analysis using this National Child Measurement Programme data from 2009 all the way to 2019 shows this overall increasing trend in both overweight and obesity prevalence among children in Year 6. And as part of the childhood obesity strategy, the government has an established programme on reformulation, and it's likely to stay very wedded to this. However, in the shorter term, we really know that businesses' ability to reformulate has been impacted. New product development and ranging have been challenging during the crisis, And a lot of this work has been delayed with staff furloughed or factory lines already running at capacity. And it's also just been really hard to get staff into the development kitchen, so we need to take all of that into account. In the short term, it means that we predict ranges will remain rationalised, in part to ensure supply, and also because new product development and range reviews have been delayed. We think that consumers will place an increased significance on physical activity, nutrition, and energy balance, and that retailers will prioritise innovative ways to drive healthier baskets, possibly over reformulation and R&D. So this could be by using price or location nudging, which we've seen to be very successful prior to the pandemic. And unsurprisingly, we do expect the publication of government consultations to be delayed, likely with some sort of new economic impact analysis required. So this would include things like the very important consultations on placement and promotions, and also on front of pack labelling, which just feels a little bit out of scope right now. We also expect existing reformulation programmes to be extended to make up for lost time. We're also going to find that new consumer habits may present opportunities to encourage healthier choices and physical activity. So we're already seeing an inkling of this, but it could easily go the other way. So Rianne's already mentioned trends like home baking taking off. So it's all well and good for people to want to lose weight, but at the end of the day, if you want to cook and bake with your family and eat a lot more sugary snacks than you were before, that is going to have an impact on health. In the longer term, reviewing and revising category plans is going to become critical for manufacturers and retailers. And there is an industry concern that the government may consider new taxes to help promote healthy choices. These are, of course, going to be very unpopular with businesses and shoppers if introduced, especially when we're headed for a deep recession. There's also a hope that actually the government focus will become broader. So, for example, emphasising the role of daily physical activity. And we've seen that this kind of applies to consumers too. So Rianne's touched on this, but actually during this period, it's been really interesting to see that shoppers' health priorities have changed. So, for example, we've seen a slight decline in the number of shoppers telling us that they're reducing their sugar consumption. But 38% of people are telling us that they've taken more exercise during lockdown. And this is probably due to a combination of framing and a bit of reverse psychology. So people have always known that we need to eat a little bit less and exercise a little bit more. But actually, by telling people exercise is restricted, we've made it really desirable. And we've also seen very little bad press around sugar because there's been so much on coronavirus, meaning that it's not top of mind for the first time in years. And this is all impacting those shopper health priorities, which, as Rianne mentioned, we're going to continue to track as the pandemic evolves and hopefully goes away. So finally, our industry consultations really demonstrated that healthy and sustainable diets are still a priority for industry. And despite the pandemic and its challenges, we have seen a commitment to this agenda. School, hospital, university and care home caterers across the UK have pledged to cut meat on their menus by 20% for sustainability reasons. But we know that many businesses are still focused purely on survival, and there are many resource challenges happening now. Generally, companies have less resource and other more imminent priorities than they did pre-crisis. And on top of that, a lot of the academic research into healthy and sustainable diets is paused. But what is very interesting in this space is that while we accept sustainability isn't top of mind for most during this time, and things like plastic packaging has made a comeback, many shoppers are actually undertaking behaviours that are very much linked with healthy and sustainable diets. So to just throw some stats at you, more than 19 million of us, or about 38%, are cooking more from scratch, and 17 million are throwing away less food. That's a third of people throwing away less food than before the pandemic. And just, I saw a question pop up earlier about what is scratch cooking. So that is very much up to the decision of the respondent. So I personally think of scratch cooking as starting purely from ingredients, but we do know there are people out there that think if they add a jar of curry sauce to a chicken breast, that is scratch cooking. So the point is people are taking a little bit more time and care and effort over those food. Another interesting thing is that 6% of the population and a staggering 9% of Londoners have tried a veg box scheme or ordered food from a local farm for the very first time. and that equates to 3 million people. So we're talking some really big numbers here that are trying more local and more vegetable-based foods for the first time. And actually, that's possibly not that surprising. So I do need to caveat that just before the pandemic hit, we undertook a substantial piece of research at IGD called Appetite for Change, which is freely available on our website. And it looks at actually how can we shift consumer behaviour towards healthy and sustainable diets. And the research used both qualitative and quantitative studies to explore healthy and sustainable diets with over 1,000 nationally representative shoppers. And we learned that before the pandemic, a staggering 66% or 2/3 of people were thinking about or already changing their diets to be healthier and more sustainable. And they actually wanted help to do it, which is really exciting for a nutritionist because most of the time people are fighting against you trying to make them healthier. So we're currently exploring whether this data still represents the population. But I wanted to share it with you today because actually what's so interesting about it is that actually health was already the primary driver for people changing their diets. Yes, environmental sustainability was a small factor and for many people a supporting reason for change. But actually the biggest reason for people choosing healthier and more sustainable foods was because they thought that it would benefit them and their immediate family health. And hypothesizing as we have that health will grow in importance for people, we also expect this to impact on the number of people consuming healthy and sustainable diets. For example, we've already seen sales of fruit and vegetables increase, especially those thought to be immune boosting in some way. So it becomes a question of how we translate this into long-term behaviour change and long-term positive behaviour change. But as I've already touched on, and so did Rianne, and you guys are clearly noticing that this is a big concern for people, the biggest barrier to all of this positive intent is going to be affordability, especially in the economic climate that we're likely headed into. In our research, we found that 41% of people thought it would be more expensive to eat a healthy and sustainable diet, and this was a really significant barrier. And of course, whilst this research was done prior to coronavirus, we know from our shopper confidence data that people are even more concerned about their finances now, with many experiencing some form of reduced income. And to quickly put how big a barrier this is into perspective, here are the other barriers to consuming healthy and sustainable diets. So affordability impacts more than twice as many people as taste perception. And that expense perception doesn't discriminate, which I find truly fascinating. So it's as much of a concern for your ABC1 shoppers as it is for your low socio-economic groups, showing that actually there is a huge piece of work to do as an industry to tackle the perception of affordability of healthy food. So to wrap up that last hypothesis, what does this mean for the future? In the short term, we believe that companies will look to champion the health and sustainability credentials of their existing products, and we're seeing examples of this all the time. The economic downturn in healthcare has really increased this sense of community, and I'm feeling that myself. So this may increase support for small local businesses such as farm shops and milkmen trying to help your local community survive throughout this. We also think that fruit and vegetable sales will continue to be elevated as people really place this increased value on their health. And some initiatives like Meat-Free Mondays suddenly feel a bit more attainable following store-cupboard cooking and shortages, and they also fit with consumer health goals. We do think that going forward, actually, the biggest area is that companies who hero affordable, healthy, and sustainable foods or recipes will thrive. People that manage to strike that balance between cost and also health will have a huge opportunity to support shopper drivers in this space. And in the longer term, industry will likely commit to further research on healthy and sustainable diets. It was a growing issue prior to the pandemic, and it's only going to become more so. We do think that businesses now truly recognise the sustainability of their supply chains is key. So we wonder whether with the combination of pandemics, but also Brexit, moving manufacture onshore and simplifying ingredients lists might become more of a priority for businesses. And we also think we'll see an increase in CSR activity and certificates like B Corp gaining traction. And this is partly linked to that hypothesis we have about greater connection with food, because people are starting to prioritise the brands that they feel very connected to and where they trust their values. And we hope in time all of this will kind of nudge consumers towards eating smaller portions of meats, greater proportions of vegetables, grains, and pulses, and that consumer health priorities will evolve, and by becoming broader, they may impact on existing trends to be healthier and more sustainable. And finally, I guess just a personal hope is that really consumers start to conflate health and sustainability of foods. At the moment, we know they're often not doing this, and yet there's a lot of academic literature out there that if you have a healthier diet, it will likely be more sustainable. So we do hope that consumers start to understand this as they gain a greater understanding of the food around them. So I'm going to, like Rhiannon, launch a poll to see which of those hypotheses you think may be most relevant to your business. So what you can see here is that really we don't seem to be too far off thinking that actually healthy and sustainable diets will become the really big issue it was growing into prior to the pandemic, and almost be elevated because of that. But I think it's really interesting to see that, you know, the stuff that was there before, so obesity being a focus and employers placing more value on the wellness of their team, are still really resonating with people and teams. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on that. So this is just to kind of conclude where we've got to. So these are our 6 hypotheses for how health and wellness will evolve. And what you've probably seen is that they all do link, but there are some bits where they're wrestling within each other. So we're wrestling between this positive intention and desire to be healthier with the fact that actually budget and affordability is going to be really, really challenging. And I just kind of want to hold our hands up and say we don't have a crystal ball, and the environment is ever changing. But what we have done is really looked at the data to develop these hypotheses, and we have increased the frequency of our health data collection. So we'll be continually monitoring how these 6 hypotheses develop. And as Rhiannon said, we'll of course be reporting back on those areas and constantly building and evolving on these. So thank you so much for listening. That's the end of our presentation part of this webinar.
Thank you, everybody. And please do, as you can see on the slides there, you've got our personal emails. So please do get in touch with either of us if you have any further questions around our research or other topics that IGD maybe could support you with.